Welcome everyone. I'm Kathy Hare, the coordinator of the first and further year program, and today we're looking at fostering connection and building a community of care. So Alicia and I are on the team behind a lot of this, plus the team of the first year coordinators, plus the student support people. So we've got a big team on today. So can I have the next slide, please, Alicia? And before we go into this, Alicia might do the welcome to country.
And the acknowledgement of country, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're meeting here today on Aboriginal land, and I'm honoured to be joining you from the lands of the Darawal people of the Yuin Nation, and you might like to acknowledge the country that you're on in the chat. And I'd like to pay our respects to the elders past, present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land.
Thank you. Always beautiful. So we've got quite a range of things, and your Google Doc will show you more detail about each of that. So we'll move into the next slide. I'm not sure. So I thought I'd just phrase this around how are students connecting now? In normal times, we know that the research is saying students, particularly those in first year, they tend to believe that talking to their classmates is not such an easy task. They understand they're a good communicator, but they actually see themselves not able to draw out a connection. Local students find it hard to make friends. And because we have a big diverse cohort coming into the university, more diversity brings in this concept of us versus them. There's a lot more discussion around that. So breaking those barriers is where we are challenged now in COVID times as well. Students are experiencing more. The research is showing us this, and we know from our experience that students are experiencing anxiety, the precarity of the situation, whether it's financial, study, finding stuff on the web, finding ways to do their study, but they're also expressing gratitude. Now, this is research based on students in postgrad in first semester, this first part of the year. This second part of the year, students have got a little bit more stability in this world, but they're actually calling out for more. And this forum is around that discussion and then how we can build connections through. But the key message I want to take across is that without intentional design in the classroom, where you can get students to connect in the classroom, because then we can bring students from all backgrounds who are struggling to make friends to have that opportunity through a structured approach to make friends, or to make connections at least. And the next slide. The references are there for the people. Our own community, the first and further year community, is around building that connection and about care. So we build community, and we have a very large community, and I think we've got about 1,000 people from UTS now on this group. They're coming from academic positions, professional staff positions, and students. So we're very pleased to have more and more students coming in. We're reaching out to the academics across all different areas, so from professor are included, and but across and including every level of academic practice working. We learn together, we share practice, we build ideas together. We have institutional impact across the university on student success. So through this co-curricular approach, the first year community is about a community of care. So I'll move on now to Simone. Next slide. Simone is going to take us through an activity.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually in building 2, and my room booking clashed with somebody else's, so I'm here in a communal room, but that's all the more exciting, I think.
Simone, can I just suggest to everyone, because there's so many people in the room, could we just put yourself in speaker view mode so you can actually see Simone? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and today, to start with, I know that we're all teaching or being taught in classrooms, which, oh, we've lost the share, that's okay. We're all in classrooms much like the one we're in right now in this webinar, where often we can only see a fraction of the faces that we'd like to see. So now I count approximately 18 of the 88 participants with some sort of background there. And it's great to see extra people in the background as well, because we acknowledge that's part of the learning and teaching experience in these times. So for this first activity, we are going to break out into rooms. And we're going to try and do something like what Georgina has. I'm trying to see who else. Janet's got a great one too, but we're going to try and create our own backgrounds. And for many students, this has been a challenge. And we are going to work at it like we are students. So we need to brainstorm, negotiate, but while we're doing so, introduce one another. Maybe we can bring our own personalities into our backgrounds as well. In the Google Doc that has been sent around, there's a link on how we can change our Zoom backgrounds. So I encourage you to check out that link. That's a UTS link, but there are many others that you can find on the web. There's also an extra link to some images that I've selected that you might like to choose, or you might have your own images already. It might be something that you've taken a photo of. So the link's there that has just been posted in the chat. So you can click on that link. I don't think I can share my screen, but we'll be moving into breakout rooms. Please.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yes. So please, when you're in the breakout rooms, start to think about who you're with. Tell your story, why you're using that background. Perhaps somebody in the room doesn't have access at the moment. So what are you going to do about that situation? Somebody dialing in who isn't able to provide a visual imagery, how can they contribute to the discussion that you're having without access to that virtual background?
How did that go? Was that hard?
Went well, I think.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I can see a few people blending into their backgrounds.
Yeah.
It is a tricky one.
It's weird because my computer actually had that issue last time I tried, but this time it's fine. So
Something about
we had a good discussion about whether or whether not to. I think it is a very preference thing.
That's true. Yeah. Whether not to, or is it best to have something rather than nothing?
Yeah. Or, like when I turn virtual backgrounds on, is it better to have, am I okay with sharing the fact that I'm in my kitchen? Well, yeah, I am actually, because guess what? I wasn't planning to work from home in my kitchen. There it is. There's my kitchen.
I have 4 dogs. When I'm having tubes, sometimes the dogs start barking, and the students were fascinated. They just wanted to see my dogs. And distraction, but every week they would say, "Oh, can we see the dogs?" And I would say no, because I was trying to keep it very focused. And then I showed them the dogs, and they're all happy.
I think the research shows that showing your pets is actually really a good thing.
I know. I read about that. I just didn't believe it. I thought they were just trying to stall, before doing work, but no, I think they actually like personal insight.
I do like personal.
Yeah. I've had 2 classes where we at the beginning of every class we spend just 2 minutes rounding up everybody's pets and showing everybody's pets.
Yeah.
One of my students had a bunch of chooks, and we would check in.
Yes.
Oh my God.
We had someone bring a chook to a meeting.
Simone, do you want to finish off, or you're happy with where we are at?
No, I'm happy. I think it's all, we've managed to reflect on our experiences, yes.
The challenge of the connection, yes. So let's move on with Alicia, please.
Hi, everyone. Hello. you've all heard from me already today, but my name's Alicia. I'm the manager of the Student Learning Hub. The Student Learning Hub is a UTS 2027 project. We're looking into physical and online spaces for students to connect with each other and with UTS support services around their learning. The Student Learning Hub has existed for approximately a year, and my goodness, what a year it has been. I think we can all agree it's been a wild ride. So what do we actually do? So the short answer is a lot. I only have 10 minutes to talk before we get into the activity, so I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. So first of all, we have a peer-to-peer learning support service point where students, UTS students and the public can access Student Learning Hub guides who will provide guidance to students, helping them navigate to the service or the system that will help solve whatever problem it is that they have. The second thing we do is we develop resources for students. Two of those pieces that we have produced, and I'll talk about them later, is How to Uni and the UTS Student Hacks podcast. And we do that in collaboration with different specialists that are situated around UTS. And the third thing we do is we operate, and this is more around our operational model, we operate using and maintain two research-based models. The first one is the UTS Support Services Framework, which I'm only going to touch on a little bit today. And most importantly, the sessional student journey. So this is a student journey map that we integrate into all of our different services around campus. So I'm going to touch on very briefly the peer-to-peer service point. So our peer-to-peer service is both physical and online. In fact, you have theoretically already interacted with it by using the Ask a Student chat on the Supporting Online Study page. So UTS is a big and confusing place, and there's lots of processes and there's lots of systems that can make it really hard for students to know what to do when they need something. Especially when that something is just a teensy bit out of the box. So we operate what we call a Tier 01 service. So I've put a little description of the service model on that page so you can have a quick look at what that means. So Tier 0 is self-help through online resources, and Tier 1 is assisted self-service. So that includes things like filling out forms, interacting with a booking system, or any other place where they need to actually interact or transact with the service or with the place that they need help from. So it also includes general inquiries and things like that. And it can also include triage to an appropriate Tier 2 service. And when we talk about Tier 2 services, we mean professional advice on complex matters that require problem solving. And Tier 3, it's more around specialist advice and specialist services that require a little bit more of an intense moment. So our Tier 01 triage service helps them to know where they should go and connects them with the Tier 2 service that can help them. We also pilot new service models to test out how we can improve the user experience for students. And we take the findings of each of these pilots and we share them as widely as we can. We change our own service model, and we also see where these pilots can inform other units if they want to pick up what we've learned as well. So the Student Services Framework, only going to touch on it very briefly, but you've already interacted with the Student Services Framework as well today through the Supporting Online Study page. So this is one of the key frameworks we use to understand what the range of support offered at UTS is. You'll have seen a version of this on the Supporting Online Study page. It was developed as part of the LXT by a human-centered design team led by Susan Hansen, who you'll hear from later today. And it's been tested and validated with students, and we operationalize it in a few different areas, including the Supporting Online Study page and in Canvas. The main thing I'm here to talk about today, though, is the sessional student journey. So this is actually how we prioritize and deliver support to students throughout the session. And it's in its rawest form, it's a shared understanding of the goals and the pain points that students experience. And we turn these goals and pain points into weekly themes in the Student Learning Hub that seek to sort of encapsulate the essence of those pieces. So we start with a different piece of work that also came out of LXT, that was also led by Susan and the Human-Centered Design team, which is their LXT student journey. We also bring in elements of the MCU student journey, and then we marry that with the inquiry and service analytics that we get throughout the session. So we operate a weekly and sometimes fortnightly inquiry stand-up with a whole range of different services, and we pull all of that information and everything that we learn into this student journey, and then we also nuance it with student feedback. So as a peer-to-peer service point, we have students coming and talking to other students in a way that's very different to how they would talk to somebody who they would see as a little bit fancier. And we also pull in some of that feedback from the different student-centered projects that are happening all over UTS. So with those themes, we take the goals and the pain points of students, and we try to elevate the profile of services that will help students achieve those goals. And we pilot improved service delivery so that we can help students overcome those pain points. And you will have seen the student journey when you had a look at the supporting online study page. So I've got a little red arrow there that shows you where you can find those pieces. And you'll have noticed in the scavenger hunt, I stuck in a sneaky question about what you think the theme of those top 3 boxes actually is. And we're going to get to that soon. So how else do we deliver on the student journey? So we use it in our peer-to-peer help, as I've mentioned. We also have a How to Uni program, which has 3 main parts, because we know that these pieces from our analysis, we've seen that these elements around how to actually get uni done are a recurring issue for students that they have to keep coming back to, revising and nuancing and having it there for them to be able to access whenever they want to, rather than in the form of a workshop at the beginning of session in orientation, is optimal. So this How to Uni program came out of work that Tyler, who you'll also hear from later today, did with his FTDI students. So they put together their lessons learned and passed it along to the next cohort of BTI students. And then Tyler and those students were kind enough to want to share the things that they had learned more widely. So we had planned to have some workshops in the hub, but COVID hit, and so we turned them into self-paced modules that students can access anytime. And you can access anytime as well. They're all on the website. The other thing we do around the student journey is the UTS Student Hacks podcast. So we have regular episodes. At the moment, they're fortnightly, and it's from students, and they're talking to students, and they're talking about the stuff that affects them. And they interview different experts or specialists around UTS. But now you need to know what the student journey looks like in practice. Like what have we learned about the student journey in this time? So this is a little graphic that I'm going to use to show how all these pieces have come together so far in spring. And I'm really sorry for the teeny tiny text, but this slide is going to get hectic as we add more data to it. So across the top, I'll move my mouse so you can see. Across this bit here, you can see the themes that the hub came up with around the student journey for spring session, for the first 6 weeks of session. We've also got some key dates that we knew were placing administrative pressure on students. And this graph actually shows the pattern. So this is the pattern of page views on that supporting online study page. So we can see that at the beginning of session, students are doing a little bit more self-help seeking because of course they are. They're reorienting themselves, they're looking like they're restarting something, they want to keep up to date with how things are going, and there's also a bunch of new students. And throughout the session, you see them becoming potentially more comfortable, but also potentially more disengaged. And it's hard to say because we don't know about what the exact cause is of them no longer sort of smashing out that help seeking. So we hope that the reason they're not help seeking is because they're okay, but we're pretty sure it's not. To the point where suddenly when it starts to get into assignment time, they're sort of launching back into that self-help again. And we've seen in the last week as well that the numbers on this page have picked up as well. So we don't know if it's because they're coming more comfortable or if they're actually developing other help-seeking patterns, including bypassing these kinds of triage points. So the next slide is these are the main themes of the self-help resources that they're accessing via the student learning, the supporting online study page. So I've looked at the top pages and the top clicks and all of the places that they've gone after they've been there, and I've categorized them into the two main goals that students are achieving each week. So at the beginning, it's accessing classes and readings, and it's looking at joining a learning community. And it moves through, and as you can see, it starts to get more into social connections and then doing uni work and doing assignments. And it should be noted that there's a low level background noise of staying up to date with the changes around returning to campus and dealing with COVID. And then finally, in this last bit, we have, here are the things that they're actually asking us questions about at the hub. So these are the three main areas that we're seeing students engaging with us around. So this is either where there's a blocker to self-help, where they can't access the self-help that they need, or they just want to discuss it with a person, because sometimes they just want to talk to you, and that's actually kind of lovely. There's a big problem though, like there's a massive problem with this dial, and some of you may have already noticed this massive gap that we have, and that's you. So we know that students interact with you in their faculty and their teachers in a way that's vastly different to how they would interact with us in support services and how they interact with each other and the kinds of things that they express. And so what we want to do, and this is something you'll be doing in your breakout rooms, is have a think about the student journey from this perspective. You've seen how we develop it, you've seen the kind of information that we pull in and what we look at, but I'm really keen on finding out what you see the goals and the pain points are in faculty. What are the things that students ask you? What are the things that you can see that they struggle with? So I'm going to end this slide. There you go. So I'm ending the slideshow, and you'll see in the Google document, hopefully you can still see my screen, there's an activity. If you click on the Jamboard page, you'll see this guy. Now, this probably looks like a massive chaotic mess. And that's because it is, because that's what student support looks like. But you'll see down the side here, we have tier 0, which is the pain points or the goals that they're experiencing. And then down here, we've got tier 1, which is the kinds of stuff that they're asking for help around. And I've mapped out the same sort of stuff that was in the slide that I showed you onto the different weeks of the session, so that you can see what kinds of questions and what kinds of goals students have throughout the year. There are also another 19 pages, one for every group that you have. And I've got a blank sheet that you can add to, and your group number is up in the top corner. And you'll know that group number when you get sent off into your breakout rooms. And a little sample, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. A little sample pain point. So I just want you to write what you think the pain point or the goal is, and then I want you to use the abbreviation of your faculty so that we can have a bit of an idea if it's different depending on what faculty you're from as well.
Alicia, they may not know how to use Jamboard. You want to just quickly give an example?
Yes, okay, let's go back to that. So to add a thing to Jamboard, you can use this sidebar here. There's a couple of different ways to do it. My preference is for the sticky note because it's brightly colored. You can choose a different color per person if you want to. I don't really care about the colors. I use lots of different colors on my one, and I use some weird color coding technique, but it doesn't matter. You can just type it in. So this is a pain point, and I'll pretend I'm from DAB. Sorry, DAB. And then it will stick on the page, and you can move it to the right week, and you can make it bigger or smaller. And if it's something where you know they've asked you lots of questions about it, you can move it further down into the pain point section. Or if it's sort of a low level background noise of stuff that you know that they're asking about, you can stick it further up to the top. And if it's bigger, I'm going to assume that more students are impacted.
Okay, so let's move to the breakout rooms then.
Awesome, thank you so much, Kathy. So hi, I'm Susan Hanson, and I'd like to share with the team a bit about the Welcome and Belonging Project. So the Welcome and Belonging Project involves 6 students and 4 staff as an initiative coming out of the Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion in response to the additional hardship experienced by students during COVID. So in May, the Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion called around 700 students at risk of being impacted by COVID to see how they were, survey their experience, but also to triage them into appropriate support services. So not surprisingly, there are a variety of challenges that were surfaced, in particular wellbeing related issues. So this was the catalyst for this project to see how UTS could understand and then address some of these challenges in partnership with students, taking a human-centered participatory approach. So we've also been looking for opportunities to build on previous research and initiatives, such as that student journey work, which Alicia has spoken to us about and we've been engaging with, and also the socially responsive design student research from 2019. So the students have done quite a lot of work over the past couple of months, both with each other as a team, but also with other students as well, to understand the problem space and to focus where our efforts will maximise the impact of this project. So we have a lot which we could share, but keeping in mind the time today, we'd like to give you a snapshot into some of the work that we've done so far, beginning with you hearing from the team some of their experiences and insights. We'll also share our mission statement, and finally there are 3 asks that we'd like to put forward to the university and this group. So as I mentioned, we'd like to start by sharing the reflections by students. And so these are both based on their own experiences, while also taking into account some of the things that they've heard from their peers. So to do this, we're going to share 3 poems written by Ilham, one of our talented students, that illustrates 3 aspects of belonging or lack thereof. So the first is Finding My Way Home, which is a reminder of the different backgrounds and the diversity of context that students come from before they come to UTS. The second, The Place Where I Belong, illustrates what belonging can look like. And the third, She Doesn't Love My Own, will give you an insight into what a lack of belonging can feel like. So the poems will be read out by Ilham, and then a couple of students will share their related insights after each of the poems. So over to you, Ilham.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to do the poem. This is Finding My Way Home. I don't have a home. I don't have country. I have land that birthed my ancestors, land that mothered me, and land that changed me. I don't have a place where I belong. I spend my whole life hoping to find hope, hoping to make nothing out of myself. My dreams die when I am young, so I spend my adolescence looking for a dream. I believe I have no worth but to settle, to blend in the background, to silence myself, because I can't find a place where I belong. I spend my youth looking for people I can call home, for dreams I can call my own, for a place where I could finally belong.
Thank you so much, Ilham. So Najib and Rock will now share some of their insights. Najib?
We come from different places, different background with different stories before we come to UTS. I came to Australia from Afghanistan at 15 and had to complete high school and learn English at the same time. I never thought university would be an option for me. I started working in construction after high school because I didn't have any other options. This was until someone told me about the UTS Humanitarian Scholarship. This made university possible, a dream became true.
Thank you, Najib. Rock.
We all have different situations at home and different relationships with Australia too. I work at the same time I study to take care of my mom, who is an amazing woman, who faced a whole lot of hardship, finally being able to bring us to Australia. Australia is not home, but I still get a lot of people staring at me like they haven't seen a Black person before. The other day, a person fell off a bike because he was looking at me so intensely.
Thank you, Rock. The second poem is called The Place Where I Belong. Ilham.
I want for love that feeds my mind, feeds my soul, and helps me find a place I can dream and call home, a place where I belong. I find a love that lets me grow, gives me purpose, reason, and the need to know all the dreams I can have and the places I can go. I believe in science. I question things I couldn't before. I find a place where I belong and it pushes me to find some more. This place I find that lets me be the best version of me, a scientist, a dreamer, a visionary. UTS is a place where I belong. Okay,
Thank you.
that's my part.
Thank you, Ilham. And so now Ilham and Anishma are going to share their insights. So back to you, Ilham.
Thank you. So UTS has great potential to give us a chance to belong to a community. Sometimes that's for the first time. I never felt like I fit in anywhere, third culture kid, and didn't want much for myself. When I had the chance to be involved in the DISC project, which is Designing Inclusive Science Curricula, I began to feel like my voice mattered and that I was part of something bigger than myself. I never thought I'd be a student advocate until someone referred to me as that. And now I find myself being involved in many projects that have changed my life personally and professionally.
Awesome. Thank you, Ilham. Anishma.
Yep, so feeling a sense of belonging makes it more likely that students will think of UTS as a place they can go for support and help, both with study and with life. UTS for me was just a place that I was at to get a degree because my cousin used to study here. This started to change with a few things, beginning with when UTS contacted me after COVID happened. Getting contacted was the start of me thinking that UTS actually cares about me. So I had a legal issue about 3 weeks ago, and it was the first time that I thought of maybe seeing if there was something at UTS that could maybe help me.
Awesome. Thank you, Anishma. And the third and final poem is called She Doesn't Love My Own. Ilham.
I find a place where I belong. She introduces me to friends I can call my own. Like me, they're very far from home, but unlike me, they don't feel like they belong. They tell me she's too much, unapproachable, inaccessible, overwhelming, and isolating. She's stressing everyone back home. They often wonder if there's hope, if they can make ends meet for the week, how long they can stay, and if things go wrong, which places they could go. They could get choked up and ask no questions. You'd rather struggle to read a map before asking someone for directions. She tells them she cares, but she doesn't convey that well. They find it hard to believe because they were once viewed as a good sell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilham. So Elsa and Bethlehem are now going to comment. Elsa.
In my perspective, for example, most Chinese students use WeChat to ask each other questions because they feel more comfortable asking other people who have similar experiences to them and speak their language. Sometimes they are stuff in group chats, which is good, but the group is too big, so we run out of time. Other times the staff don't know the answer and tell us to call student center. However, not all students will have the access to connect the student center, and include me. I think if I need to wait for a long time, I might probably give up to ask for help, since I have been waited for like about half an hour several times.
Thanks, Elsa. And now Bethlehem.
There's opportunity for the diversity in UTS to feel more authentic and genuine, and not just a token. There are also some groups, particularly non-white people, who may not feel comfortable accessing services or feel that services are provided for them. A lot of the time, I feel like I'm a part of the quota that the organization is just trying to meet. I'm that token woman of color just to add diversity to the white men that do exist. Services are there, but it doesn't feel like they were there. They were created with me in mind. And so I started the African Society for that sole purpose. I wanted to create a community where people can feel there's a place for them and also promote genuine inclusion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ilham and team. So after engaging with ourselves, our team, and also many students from across the university, also after several analysis and synthesis sessions together, the group refined our project problem into a mission statement. So our mission statement is create opportunities to build the connections that strengthen belonging and UTS's identity as a diverse university that cares. So there's really two parts to this mission statement. There's the first, the opportunity to build connections. And the second is around identity and that diverse university that cares. We're actually doing this in different ways at the moment, in and out of the classroom. But there's an opportunity to really claim it and explicitly own it. And we also feel that belonging is something that underpins both of these things in the mission statement. So to work towards achieving this mission statement, the group have 3 asks that we would like to put forward to this group, which Bethlehem is now going to describe for us. So I'll hand back over to Bethlehem.
Thanks for that. So involve us, provide a seat at the table and value this through remuneration in ways that are important to students. People's experiences are unique and therefore you can only guess what people's experiences are like without having those shared experiences. In saying so, one size doesn't fit all. We need to acknowledge the spectrum of people and needs by including a variety of students. Advocating diversity is great, but first we've got to acknowledge that it exists, right? Before we can actually celebrate it. Also, there are many opportunities to value our involvement in different forms. For instance, I had received academic credit for my involvement as a student lead in the DISC project. Similarly, other students received remuneration in ways in which ultimately showed that they were acknowledged and also their involvement was valued. Understand us. So invest in better understanding students to ensure that we're tailoring services with us in mind. Our abilities, our backgrounds, our capacities our capacities to receive help, our differences and our needs. An inclusive service includes how it can be accessed and people's journeys in and out of that service. Therefore, supporting them in all parts of that service is actually essential. There's so many unspoken barriers. For example, in my culture, my problems are my problems. We don't ask for help. And this can make it so much harder to work out what support is needed without actually having that experience in accessing those services. And therefore, ultimately, you don't know what support is out there to support you in any way. And unfortunately, this experience actually intensifies when you are at multiple intersections in our society. So the worst part, I guess, for me is that if you're an international student here at university, this is exponentially harder. And so the cycle of privilege, this refers to the privilege of having access to an opportunity, which then increases your access to another opportunity, and so forth and so forth. Unfortunately, this is also the case if you are a minority student and you have limited access to these opportunities. That limited access creates another limited access to opportunities, and that continues as well. So basically that continues the negative cycle of privilege. And help us build connections. Increase opportunities to create genuine connections within UTS, with UTS, and with each other. Help us create a network. University is about more than just studying. It's about having a student experience and building our network for now and beyond. These networks are what differentiates us from online university, and it's actually one of the greatest things that UTS has to offer. And so there's a term that we did coin up called comfortability. Thanks, Rock, for that. So it affects the ability to recognize opportunities to form genuine connections. This is the essential foundation for a real student experience and to feel part of the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bethlehem. So where are we right now? We're right in the middle of this, exploring the solution space. So we've started concepting and identifying opportunity areas with the team. We've also started engaging a range of different service providers and units across the university. So next we plan to reach out to a broader UTS staff and student community, and we are very interested in more faculty engagement. So please let me know if you are interested in being involved. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. we are interested in them being part of a project with us, with belonging. Alicia, do you want to say something about that?
Only that IML are looking at a project around designing in belonging into the curriculum, and that we're really keen to be working closely with the students on that. And particularly that thing of wanting a seat at the table around course design and course review, subject design. We would like to continue that conversation and maybe hopefully have some kind of workshop on October the 6th where we can bring staff into that space, depending on what you think is most appropriate.
So that's a university-wide stuff, but focusing around designing belonging into the curriculum with students as a co-project. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I wrote them down and now I've lost that bit of paper.
Oh, here it is. The room.
Helena's here, Luke's here, Jessica's here, Joyce is here, Alice is here, and Isabel is here. So those guys are part of my team. I was going to get them to put their hands up. You can do that if you want, team, but I'll just keep moving. Okay, so this is what UPass is. I'll give you 30 seconds to read it. Okay, if you don't know, you can always Google it. The idea of UPass is all about facilitating learning, not giving answers, and it's an ancient thing that has happened, but now we're in the Zoom environment. And within a week in March, we converted from all face-to-face to online Zoom. Here are some of the challenges we faced. One of the biggest ones, which is always a challenge even in the face-to-face situation, is the sage on stage. The leader's doing all the talking. That's that little star on the left. You can see the leader's the center of every interaction. The students aren't talking to each other. They're not connecting. They're not building that learning community, which flows beautifully from what we just saw from Susan's project and the students. What we want is on the right, that connection across students across, you know, kind of in the space. And by the end of semester, we should be seeing that. Another issue, which again we've talked about, is the black box. I'm calling it the black box syndrome. They have their microphones off, they have their cameras off, if they have a microphone or camera or the network connection in the first place. So, and we all know the freedom of turning your camera off. So in some senses we can't blame it, but gee, it's hard when you're trying to facilitate learning if you can't see their faces. The third little challenge, I think, is called the exit syndrome. That's also been mentioned. Students get put in the breakout room, or students come and they see that it's interactive and they leave. You can't do anything. It's a lot harder to leave a face-to-face class because you have to kind of run out the door, whereas in the Zoom thing, it's very simple. So they're the three challenges that I've noticed that are new to us based on the other stuff. So some of the stuff we do, I put this little circle together. These are some of the principles behind what happens in UPass. We want to build connection, we want to use competition, we want to allocate students to have responsibility, and we want to learn how to hold the silence. So I'm just really quickly going to unpack these for you. The first one, we've had a couple of leaders who haven't had cameras on. I've actually lent a leader a camera because it's really important that the person running the discussion is at least on camera. We have small talk or check-in, get the leaders to just talk and build up that mentoring connection. One of my leaders actually said she only has 3 or 4 students. She puts them into a breakout room without her, which means that then they can talk privately. Another leader I've seen checks in privately. So if they see someone who isn't participating and they're not sure why, they can send them a private message via Zoom. One of my lovely leaders, who's a postgrad leader, has been playing this Lost My Voice game. So that gets the students to connect because she pretends she can't talk and therefore they connect. That works in, you know, she said it's just mid-semester. She's already had them for 4 or 5 weeks. And she's the one most charismatic and beautiful people on the face of the planet. So it works for her. Some of the things we find with students is to get them to interact is competitions, things like Kahoot, Socrative. Tan, who was here before, but I think she's had to go, did a bingo. One of my leaders in physics, what he did was he had a poll that he just kept relaunching. So he'd have multiple choice questions, have an untitled poll with an untitled question, and then say, okay guys, what do you think about when you chuck a ball in the air in a car? Does that ball stay with you or does it move? you know, things like that. I didn't really follow. I was not very good at physics. But yeah, just relaunching that poll, you know, as a facilitator, it's really hard, but this allows him to get an understanding of where the students are. He can slow down the pacing if they're not following, and kind of look at more detail at some of the concepts, or he can speed up if he knows they're all with him. And that's a really easy way to get feedback and connection in the UPass space. This is the bingo game. She was doing it in economics, so she had different statements, but I'll just move on again because of timing. We've already seen Jamboard today. I saw a leader in nursing. So Helen is here. She's a mature age student in nursing. But what they did was they had some Google slides, and they put different elements of blood on different slides, and then allocated students to say, okay, you guys talk about what coagulation is. You guys talk about what the, I don't know, rhesus factors are. I'm really making this stuff up because I am not a blood expert. But, you know, breakout groups, as we know. One of the things I think it's really important, I've talked a lot with the leaders, is to prepare questions and give students a responsibility. So say, you guys are going to investigate coagulation, and you're going to come back and share that. One of the things I talked about with one of my leaders this semester is serial versus parallel groups. What I mean by that is you can allocate everyone the same question, which is what we've been doing in this forum, or you can allocate people different questions. And the advantage of allocating different questions is they all have one think time. So you're not having to build that think time into each question. And you can then, they can then do their section, say in 4 groups, there's 4 things, and come all back and share. So that saves time. We've only usually got 45, 50 minutes in those classes. But that doesn't work if you've got concepts that actually kind of build on each other, where you need that. One of the things that one of my leaders wrote in nursing, again, I'll just let you read this. Okay, so what she's demonstrating is that knowledge that you can have silence in a Zoom session. They might be actually just looking up stuff. Usually the students haven't necessarily spent a lot of time on the lecture material, and then they, and so they might need actually just to look at it and think. So there's some of our UPass principles, and then we're going to kind of build an activity now. So I'll stop.
So we're on to breakout groups, and the challenge is sitting on.
So on the Google Doc that you have the link to, if you scroll down to the second page, that's the activity that we're working on now. So each breakout group will have its own table, and you can just assign a scribe, discuss some strategies that you would advise the class leaders to use to encourage interaction between students so that they're not just the sage on the stage. And if you can, write your responses in the table, but don't worry if you can't. We don't have a lot of time to do this, so I'm just going to pop you into breakout groups now.
Okay. So we're going to move into the next section where we're looking at community and care. And I'm going to do a quick interview with Anne Gardner, who's the head of school of professional practice in engineering. And Anne, I'll start the conversation. Anne, I've watched your wonderful MS Team site where you've got a number of things around school structures, but you've also got a wellness and resilience and a flourishing site. Do you want to tell us a little bit, what's your view on how the community works, in how care works for you as a head of school?
Well, there's a couple of underlying principles in what we do. One is that staff are whole people. They're three-dimensional beings, and that at work we only see part of their whole life. They've got a whole other part of life and other roles that are actually more important than being a worker at UTS. Don't tell Attila I said that, but anyway. Another underlying principle is that if we can't expect staff to demonstrate a culture of care with their students if we're not creating a culture of care for them. And so that's why, first of all, we set up the team site to help staff keep connected while we're working from home. The site does have different channels for different programs in the school, but we also have the general channel, we have a coffee break channel, and we've got the wellness and resilience channel as well. So the other thing that I really appreciate is that I'm not doing a lot of the posting. It's a group effort. So we have a...
We've got a team of 3 that work around this. So.
Yeah, we do. So the school manager, Trish, posts a lot of inspirational material. So she might start the morning off every day with a great poster or a quote or a photo to try and lift our spirits and get us through the next, that day. The site also works in tandem with our weekly school meetings, which do allow me to get information out to staff, but most of the time I like to focus on what are the issues and questions that staff have. So they get to ask the collected brains trust of people in the school how to solve that problem or where to go to solve that problem. So the school also, or the school meetings and the team site includes people from other schools as well. So it's not just our school, we've sort of had this outreach effect to other people in the faculty because I think people have been looking for some way to connect to other people.
And that's an important need where you're connecting with that weekly meeting, regular time. And I think you were saying that part of this culture of care comes from your teaching process.
Well, it sort of grew out of that.
Yes.
And really links back to that, to that underlying principle of we want our staff to care for our students. So as managers and leaders, we should be caring for our staff as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. And Anne I've known for a long time, and she's behind Spark. She's a wonderful teaching and learning academic, as a researcher as well, and it's great this team is running. Thank you, Anne. So I'm going to move on to Tyler, because Tyler's going to present us a view of community and build us concepts of belonging and connection and care. Thanks, Tyler.
Hi, everyone.
Now, yes.
Just going to remove my virtual background, which is a bit distracting. Oh, not that one either.
That's fine.
Why don't we leave that one, actually? We're there. And I'm just going to present some slides here. So give me a few seconds to load this up.
So while Tyler's doing that, Tyler's from TDI. He's a first and further year coordinator from that faculty. I forgot to mention that Simone is a first and further year coordinator from business. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of building off what Anne is doing and the conversation Anne and Kathy had just there, and the theme for today, which is kind of building a culture of care in a community. So the way I've kind of framed this is more of a kind of provocation and kind of thinking through what do communities in cultures of care look like? What do they mean? What are we talking about? Just as some kind of, a provocation as you kind of go back into your units, classes, wherever you're kind of working, because we're all different staff from different places, as different ways to think about it and how you might change the way that you're working. So if we're talking about communities of care, what we really need to kind of start to think about is care itself. And so you have care, you have cared, you're caring. I care for you, I care for my students. If you're in a health context, they say, I cared for my patient. You might say they are really caring. And then we also have this concept from a kind of governance structure or responsibility is a duty of care. And this is kind of where I want to pick up is in a university, this duty of care, this responsibility is very kind of paramount. And the thing I like to think about is we need to put our gas masks on first. I know a lot of us haven't been on a plane for a long time, but this is the kind of way I think a bit about our duty of care. And if you think back to your first aid, you need to make sure that you're safe so that you can then look after someone else. And so the kind of structure that I've kind of thought this through is our managing staff have a duty of care over the staff. And then if you're in a classroom, the staff have a duty of care over the students in the class to some degree. And then it's interesting to start to think about how does this then look onto success. So a lot of our metrics as staff, if you're teaching, is kind of based on the student results and how well the students are going, the SFS results. And then if that went well, you got good SFS, those staff results mean that the managing staff kind of get better results and they're more successful. Which is just kind of an interesting thing to think about, I think. And what we're starting to talk about here is this culture of care has to exist in a context. And we're talking about this culture of care in specific communities. And with our communities, the way that we're kind of thinking about communities is there is some mutual interest, there's a shared purpose, and there's a sense of reciprocity. When you start to think about the connections and links between what is a community and what is culture, both culture and communities have a way of being, a way of working, or a way of doing. And some of these concepts can be seen. So you have your rules, your law, your governance, and then some of them can't be seen. So your social norms or your unsaid rules. And this lovely little iceberg model is a really fantastic tool to start to dissect some of these explicit and inexplicit concepts that kind of exist in our communities and our culture, where a lot of the stuff you can see on the surface, but at the end of the day, there's really these thoughts, beliefs, and values that really drive what is a community, what is the culture. And bringing this to the UTS context, we have different levels of community. So you start on a very broad level. We have UTS as a whole. We then go down into a faculty or a unit, depending if you're in a professional staff as well. And then there's schools. You then have a course or a team or a community of practice, which is where I think we're kind of at. Then you have a subject and then a peer group. So different staff and different students can see themselves at all of these different levels. And as we were talking about before, both communities and cultures have different practices, different behaviors, and they all have different thoughts and values and beliefs. So each of these different levels of the community actually has a different style of culture and a different way to engage. But the one key thing is I can show people an example of all those different levels of community that may or may not exist. But coming off the back of the Belonging Project and those amazing poems, we actually start to realize you can identify a lot of these different levels of community, but at the end of the day, what really matters is actually having a sense of belonging and a sense of identity to some of these different levels of our community. And so if you're a student in a class and you don't feel that sense of belonging within your subject or within your course, that's when things start to get very challenging, as we've heard about. And belonging is this innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. And we often try to acquire it by fitting in or seeking approval. And so for our students, or when you were a student or even as a staff member in work and in our own work cultures, it's really clear to tell those moments when you feel like you're trying to fit in rather than there's that sense of belonging that's being developed. And the real difference here between this fitting in and the belonging is where fitting in is you assess the situation and you become who you need to be accepted. Whereas belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires to be who we are. And this is where the concepts that Anne was talking about in her communities is we're actually recognizing that people are a three-dimensional person. Someone might be a parent, and that's what they actually find their sense of purpose is in. They love being a parent, and it's how do we accept them for that love of being a parent, whereas someone else just loves working and they want to work down that career route. And how can they be accepted for who they are in the classroom? And this extends to the importance of where with students and working with diverse students, we need to allow different students of different races and kind of sexual orientation to be who they are and work with each other, and this kind of allow for this inclusivity. And this starts to lead to the challenge that we face is for staff to do our jobs well, we need to be well and motivated. And for students to learn well, they need to be well and motivated. And so we start talking about there's things that you need to be well and there's things that you need to be motivated. They're a little bit different. And I'm not going to touch on these too much, but the main thing that I want to pull out of here is that in both of these instances, these relationships and social health in the middle here relationships are a very key part of being well. And at the same time, relatedness is a key part of being motivated from self-determination theory. And so if we start to look at relatedness, what is relatedness? It's that people need to care about and be cared about by others to feel connected without ulterior motives. And coming back to this difference between knowing and connecting with each other is that connection that happens is when their energy exchanges between people. And if you think back to a time when you felt a connection with someone rather than just knowing them, there's a very big difference in how that relationship is perceived. And that's where that sense of belonging actually starts to come through, is when you are listening openly and you have that exchange with someone, you can actually feel that real sense of connection with someone or something. It doesn't have to be a person. And this is where that sense of belonging starts to come from, is where you can connect with someone and feel that relatedness, feel that energy between each other. And this is where that sense of belonging really stems from. And the kind of bigger question here is, as a staff member or as a student, what's the difference between how many people you know versus how many people you've connected with? In your work area, how many people have you actually connected with on that and sense that energy and connectedness between each other? As a student, or thinking back to when you were a student, how many people did you actually have a conversation with and feel like you could connect with them and feel that energy in the room through those conversations?
We'll have to finish, Tyler, soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, coming back to the things that we need to be well, things to be motivated. So we need engaged relationships to be well, and we need this sense of relatedness to be motivated. For staff, not going to touch too much on this, but this is the challenge we face for students to learn well. And this comes back to exactly what the Belonging Project is kind of working on, is students spend the majority of their time in the classroom where they may or may not feel a sense of belonging to the subject or to the university. And due to this lack of belonging, they may not reach out for support from us as staff or even the university services themselves that are there for them to support them. And what I really want to kind of get you to take away is, we spend so much time in our work focusing on the content or the delivery, but where I think it kind of comes down to is, how can we actually embed 5 to 15 minutes, whether that's in the classroom with your students or, in the case of Anne, in the work community, we're actually developing a culture of care in our communities. How can we actually make sure to prioritize that so that not only are we as staff well and motivated, but our students are well and motivated and therefore more successful.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. We're going to move on to a little section now around your reflection and sharing. And we'll move with Nick. And then we'll come back, and if you can reflect back on the day, we've got a Mentimeter activity that some of you might like to share in their thoughts. But Nick Magnanus, who's the first, thank you, Magnanus, who's the first and further year coordinator in FAS. So over to you, Nick.
Okay, yeah, so hi everyone. As Kathy said, I'm the FFYE coordinator in School of Arts and Social Sciences. So I just wanted to spend just the last 2 minutes, I think, to get us to reflect a little bit on what we've been, presented with today in regards to kind of reflective practice and self-care and so on. So there is a Mentimeter. I don't know if that could be shared while I suppose I give a couple of reflections.
Mine's put it up, yes.
Thank you. So I've been thinking about the concept of self-care over the last couple of days, and it actually links really well to what Anne Gardner was saying, because it became clear to me that we cannot separate connecting and caring for our students from caring also for our own well-being. So I know that as an educator, I perceive that if my students are not comfortable, or if they're not connecting either with each other or with me, and that impacts also on my own well-being. So for me, caring for students and also caring for myself is something that goes hand in hand. So as you can start sharing your thoughts about, what is perhaps one thing that you might consider to implement in your practice to improve connection and care with your students, I'd just like to share a very quick kind of reflection about my own experience this semester so far. So I coordinate a subject in FAS, and in this subject I have one Zoom tutorial and I also have one face-to-face tutorial. So I think like most of you actually thrive on that face-to-face interaction with students. So I was very, very excited to return back to campus and teach that that face-to-face tutorial once a week. It surprised me, however, how difficult it was in those first few weeks for students to connect with their classmates or with me, because of the implementation of those social distancing restrictions. So I think there were like two factors at play. First, I think that the students themselves had almost kind of forgotten what a real classroom environment was, and that kind of surprised me after just one semester of doing remote learning. But second, and most importantly, I think my face-to-face tutorial only had about 18 students, so most of them were in the Zoom tutorial, and they were all scattered across a very large room, with quite a few kind of meters between each other, making kind of group work and social contact really difficult. So it kind of shocked me in those first couple of weeks that I kind of had to rethink about how to give a face-to-face tutorial in these new conditions, and also how to rethink how to actually use the room and which activities were actually suitable in this new environment. So I had to do that, while at the same time what actually worked in that new environment obviously wouldn't work on the online Zoom tutorial. So I had to kind of manage both situations at the same time. So I think it was a really good reminder that we can never get too comfortable with our usual strategies and practice, because there are times when relying on what we usually do just doesn't work anymore. So in terms of how I went about improving connection and care for my students, and thus also care for myself, I think it was about a willingness to let go of previous habits and routines, to kind of take a step back, to think about what the learning outcomes are and decide new ways of engaging students. So after a kind of bumpy first couple of weeks, I think the students slowly began to connect with both each other and also with me. So I'd really be interested to kind of hear what your thoughts are on the Mentimeter, to see if you kind of had any kind of similar experiences either in the online space or, returning back to campus face to face. I see that there are, sorry, Kathy?
Simone is sharing. That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so I have some, interested to see some thoughts. So I have like in my tutorial asked on 1 week, are they okay? One-on-one check-ins. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Co-creation with students, examples, rules of engagement, ways to communicate. Yeah, I think that kind of, you need to kind of have that conversation with students, not only with those online classes, but also when you're returning back to those face-to-face classes about what they're expecting, about what they actually need in the current circumstances. And, you know, it should be a kind of, you know, I think the students and the facilitator, the educator should kind of meet each other kind of halfway, you know what I mean? Explain to the students, you know, what you're actually kind of finding difficult about the social distancing, about the online classes, set the expectations. Yeah, I agree. And I think more importantly is get students to come up with solutions.
So thank you, Nick, and thank you, everyone. Please keep continuing adding things to this site. We've gone a little bit over now. We're now 10 to 4. So we used to have the forums for 2 hours, so you can see why, and we're trying to add. But thank you, Nick. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Georgina. Thank you, Alicia, Alisa, Simone, and all the wonderful attendees and the input you've put in, the UPass leaders, the students and their poems. Susan, I've forgotten Susan, and the wonderful from Equity. A great community. And I think we share already, and you can see that from the comments people have made, but building it out into the wider community and how you can influence others in getting that change happening. I think that's our little slow change with your colleagues and just getting that discussion around no longer the water cooler, but somehow in the Zoom meetings that we have. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all the team and all the help everyone's done.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you.
Says goodbye.
Thank you, Kathy.
And we'll keep the chat and I'll put that there. Thank you, Simone. That's fantastic. Great.